Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October meeting of the Public Works Committee. Committee members are Councilmember Barbara Haynes-Burke, Vice Chair, Councilmember John Larson, Councilmember Annette Scipio, and myself, Jeff McIntosh. Agenda items approved by the committee will move forward for consideration at the City Council meeting on Monday, October 17th at 7 p.m. As is our custom, we will deal with consent items first. If anybody has an item they would like to discuss in further detail, please let me know. If not, if I could get a motion for an approval of the consent agenda, I'd appreciate it. C2? Okay.
I move for approval of the remaining items on the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. If we can get a vote, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. That is unanimous. Let's go to item C2.
Item C2, resolution to enter into an agreement with Duke Energy to install and maintain Level 2 electric vehicle charging stations on city property.
Good evening, Chair and committee members. Just a brief overview of this item. Back in the spring of 2021, Duke Energy opened up their pilot program for Park and Plug for municipalities and other businesses and organizations in the state to apply for various locations where Duke could then come in and install, own, operate charging stations. We, in the Office of Sustainability, submitted 9 locations, and of those, 3 were chosen, and Duke Energy at this point does plan to move forward with installing Level 2 charging stations at the Carl Russell Recreation Center, Haynes Hosiery Recreation Center, and Jamison Park.
Okay.
Chairman.
Questions on that?
Yeah, after railing yesterday about the need to have more energy efficient and hybrid automobiles, and the question of power stations as charging stations came up, and I was delighted to see this part on the agenda, and thank you for organizing the grants to begin that process. I hope that we will continue to add power stations throughout the city. If Duke Power is willing to add, I'm kind of curious that they only chose 3 of the 9 you submitted. I'd love to see one in Washington Park, for example, or some of our larger parks that have well visited. The golf courses, for example, would be another good location. So keep it up. And basically, we're going to need these in the future. It's where we're going to be going, and we need these stations out there. So thank you for doing that.
Yes, and I will add, Washington Park was one of the other 9 locations that we submitted. I'm not sure exactly what went into Duke's decision-making process, but I will say that because all of the locations we submitted were recreation and park sites, some of these sites were either eliminated or worked around based on the construction schedules at some of the locations, since a lot of work is going on in our parks right now and recreation centers. So I'm not exactly sure, again, what led to the decision to these 3 sites, but we're happy with them because they are of no cost to us. So
Is this
yes.
going to be an annual thing? Are we going to see Duke Power periodically doing this? Or?
Right now, we're not sure. We do know that it shifted from the initial pilot program to a full program that Duke does plan to continue on with. So there may be additional opportunities in the future for us to submit locations. Of course, other businesses in the community can choose to submit their locations as well to really increase the number of stations. And then to your point, we are actually adding another additional one in the 6 Cherry Trade parking deck because we won some funding through the VW settlement fund. So we're currently planning on 4 new locations.
Great, thank you. That's progress.
Other questions or comments?
Move approval. If there's anything to be done.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
And I do have a question before we vote. A couple, actually. What is the cost per installation of these sites? I mean, I know these are coming to us at no cost, but do we have an idea what these cost?
Yeah, so it actually depends on a couple of variables. One is, and probably the largest one, is proximity to a site to plug into the grid. So if there is not already a place set up where Duke Energy can connect the charging station to wherever their nearest grid location is, it'll be more expensive to then extend that service to a new meter and a new site. But I would say that for level 2, I mean, the charging stations themselves are maybe 10,000 on average, and so the rest of the cost, we're estimating maybe 15 to 20,000 additional dollars for the 6 Cherry trade deck because of the construction costs there and some of the again, logistics of getting the electricity actually to the station. So again, it's somewhat variable, but those are probably average costs.
Suffice to say, they're not inexpensive.
They're not. They are, however, much, much cheaper still than the DC fast charge stations. But again, it does depend on where you're putting them. So we could, in the future, ideally, if we wanted to take the responsibility on as a city, try to identify locations where it would be a somewhat easier connection to the electric grid to try to cut down on costs that way.
Second question is, I know there's a compatibility issue. Tesla plugs are not usable by non-Tesla vehicles. Are these, I'm assuming, will not be the Tesla style?
Correct. These are level 2 general ones, so they will have multi-functional plugins. So while Tesla charging stations only work for Teslas can still plug in anywhere. And so this is a station that will work for any electric vehicle. It is not specific to a specific model or make of a vehicle.
And my last question is, and we can get this at some future date, but I'd like to know what might be coming down the pipeline in terms of any other federal dollars that could be
Yes.
that could help us out on this.
Yes, we are absolutely keeping track of that,
Great.
so we
Figured
can
that.
bring that at another time.
Thank you. Okay, if we could have a vote on this? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. All right, let's move to item G1.
Item G1, Winston-Salem Transit Authority Services Update and HDR Presentation on WISTA Route Study.
Thank you. Mr. King, you going to tee this up and hand it off?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. Every quarter, we are granted the opportunity to present information on our transit services and the status of what's happening. This month, we have with us Patrick McDonough with HDR. HDR has been hired, Patrick McDonough, I'm sorry, is the senior transit planner with HDR. HDR has been hired to look at our transit services through a route study that they're conducting, and so he will present updates on where they are with the study and provide some information on some of their findings. Additionally, in your packet, you do have the information that Donna Woodson usually provides to you when she makes her presentation every quarter. If you all have questions, then we can, of course, invite Donna to come up and answer those questions. But unless you want her to, she did not plan to present. We thought we would allow Patrick all of the time needed.
Yeah, that's okay with me. I know it's her typical high-quality information that we look forward to every time, so we appreciate that, Donna. And unless other council members want to see that, I think we'll move on to the HDR.
Okay. Well, then, at this time, I will turn it over to Patrick McDonough. Thank you.
And Tanique, thank you for your work on this. I know this has been a heavy lift, so we appreciate all the effort that's gone into this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tanique, and thank you, Council. My name is Patrick McDonough. It's good to be here, and as a former Winston-Salem resident for 8 years, it's great to be back. So what we're going to cover this evening is just tell you a little bit about the route study that we're doing with the team here in the Transportation Department and at WISTA. we're going through, I'm going to hit quickly some of the key activities we've done, and then I want to move into more of the data so you can see some of the things we're learning, which I think you'll find some things in here pretty interesting today. We're planning for what we're calling quick wins, so service change recommendations that we'll be bringing in a kind of minor fashion to Tanique and her team probably in the next 3 months or less. Those will be minor adjustments to see how we can make near-term improvements. But at the end of the study, we're going to be proposing 2 alternatives for a kind of comprehensive rethink of how WISTA could be operated to deliver, more transportation, more opportunity to the residents of the city, more value for every dollar we spend. So what have we been looking at? We've been looking at ridership. We've been looking at what day of the week people ride, which route, which month of the year, which stop are they going to. That's data that we get from Donna and her team. Second piece is we look at third-party data. There's a great data set which has a very, very long name. It's called the Longitudinal Employment Housing Dynamics Database, and it's great at telling you where people live and where people work, and you're going to see some of it in about 7 minutes. So we also are talking about 3 ways of measuring success in transit. Service effectiveness is how much passenger travel we get through unit of service. So if we roll a bus down the street for an hour, how many people get on it? Cost effectiveness is how much cost we incur per unit of service. If we roll the bus down the street and we carry 20 people, how much does it cost per person to carry them? And then cost efficiency is how much cost it takes to run the service, whether people board the bus or not. And WISTA is doing pretty well here, but how well is the question? And the answer is you're the best in the state. Flat out, WISTA is the lowest cost per hour of service of the 13 largest transit properties in North Carolina. The purple line that's thicker than all the others, that's WISTA. I have to say that the other thing that's very impressive about this performance is what is the biggest word in the economy we've heard the last 2 years? Inflation. So you can look at the upper part of the chart, you'll see several of the transit authorities are going up. WISTA's costs have kind of remained steady. So there's something going on here that's good at maintaining cost.
Can I get you to just explain a term, per vehicle revenue hour?
Great, good catch.
Caught me.
So an hour of rolling a bus, a vehicle revenue hour is when the door is open and collecting passengers. An out of service hour would be like you're driving from the garage to the beginning of the first route.
Open for business.
Yes, exactly. And if I have another like transit nerdy term, catch me and stop me. That was a good catch.
Thank you.
So knowing that you guys, just a little bit about the data here, you guys are performing well on cost efficiency. A lot of the rest of the story here is how can we improve on cost effectiveness and service effectiveness as well. This is our team here. We have some folks from HDR, some folks from WISTA, and from the city here in the pictures. We rode the buses for a day. We took notes. We talked to people. We talked to operators. One of the things we put together in sort of our quick wins is we've got 2 pieces of work that are done already. The team asked us for a way to prioritize investment in amenities. Which bus stops are getting shelters and benches and trash cans and why. And so really, we have set this, we've looked at the system and we've set up sort of 4 tiers of stops. There's a base stop. There's a level 1 stop, which is when 10 to 19 people board a day. Level 2, 20 to 39 people boarding per day. And level 3 is 40 boardings and up. Anything that's below 10, that's kind of a base level stop. But as you can see here, there's lots of different types of amenities from, a sign and a concrete pad might be the basic level. As you move into level 1, you're looking at seating. Level 2, you're looking at shelter. Level 3, you're looking at enhanced shelter, maybe bike racks, maybe other specialized information services.
I have a question about that chart.
Yes.
Daily boardings, does this say that level 1 is where it's a bus and it had 10 to 19 passengers?
Correct, yes.
That's what that is?
Yes.
And buses that had 40 plus passengers
Is level 3.
is level 3?
And I just noticed with base level, it says none. That should really say 0 to 9. My
Okay.
mistake, sorry
Less
about
than
that.
10.
So does it say that level 1 seating, I'm just trying to understand the
Sure, so
enhanced shelter.
Yeah.
Level 2 are the only places where we have shelters?
So this is more of a statement of goals than a statement of what's out there today. We know that right now, if we were to look at all of our level 3 and level 2 shops, not all of those amenities are there presently. The idea is if we're planning a capital program, by going to the stops where the most people use it, we give the most people benefits as soon as possible. So this reflects like if all of our stops that perform this way were built out exactly how we'd like them, these are the things they'd have. We definitely don't have all of the stops in the system to these levels yet. Is that helpful? Okay. I'll keep going, but we can come back to this. So I talked about amenity prioritization. The other thing, we've been talking about is implementing service standards here. I was the former director of service planning at Go Triangle over in the Raleigh area, and we were able to raise ridership by about 50% over 4 or 5 years doing what I'm about to tell you about. So we start up at 12 o'clock there and analyzing route performance. You look at your services, you find which ones are performing well. You want to find out why and learn more from them. You look at your ones that are performing not so well. That's the places where maybe we need to do something with the service differently, or maybe we need to remove it and do something different with the hours. So the yellow circle, we identify our low-performing services based on our system average. In the blue circle at the bottom right, we propose changes to those services. And then we go out and ask the public, what do you think? Have we got this right? Could we do better? Once we've had that conversation with the public, we have a way forward. We go to the purple circle where we reassign hours from lower performing services to either routes that have some crowding on it, maybe higher demand, or we try out some new ideas. And then what that hopefully does is it produces a more productive, cost-effective transit system. And what it does is it raises the system average. So the next time you do the cycle, the routes that were medium performing last time, they have to carry more people to stay above the float line. So if you do this over and over again, you create what we call a virtuous cycle. It starts to raise the bar to do more and more each time you do the process. So we've started taking a look at the WISTA routes, and here we've talked about passenger trips per vehicle revenue hour, and it says unlinked passenger trips. That's kind of a wonky term. Let me talk about that too. If I get on Route 83 and I ride to downtown and I just get off, that's one unlinked trip. If I ride 83 to downtown and then get on 96, that's 2 unlinked trips, but it's 1 linked trip because I made a transfer. So when you think an unlinked trip, that's I didn't switch. Okay, but by counting unlinked trips, those are like when everyone gets on the bus through the counters, that makes us easiest to do the math. And what we saw here, you can see that you have some high performers and some low performers. And basically, we've put performance thresholds of if you're more than 25% below the system average, that's near the top of the chart, that is low performing for that indicator. And you're kind of in the orange to red. If you're above 75% of the system average, you're a high performing on that indicator, and you're like the light yellow to green. And so this is kind of how we're looking at all the routes at the data level. We'll come back to this in a minute. But first I want to talk a little bit about that census data and where do people live and work. So one of the things we've done is we've tried to take a look at where are the biggest employment centers in Winston-Salem, and because of how income is correlated with use of the bus, maybe there's like a household that has no cars, or maybe a household with 2 workers that share 1 car. Those tend to be more in your lower and middle income brackets, so that's where we focused our analysis. If you look where are the largest centers for those 2 income groups, they're Haynes Mall / Forsyth Hospital, that cluster, downtown, Wake Forest Medical Center, Atrium Health, and then the Haynes Mill Road area up towards the north side of town. And basically, Haynes Mall in Forsyth County is the biggest employment cluster. So we're going to just look at the analysis for one. I have oodles of charts for all the others, but I'm only going to show you one set. A few pieces of takeaways here that I think you'll start to see in some of this data. Retail jobs are more likely to be associated with low-income workers. Medical jobs, you might see some middle-income workers. We have high-income workers concentrated more heavily in West Winston-Salem, and you'll see that bus ridership on the system is lowest there. So it's definitely some correlation there. And then the different employment clusters, they have various relationships with places where people live. So you'll see at Haynes Mall, some people are commuting from this area, but at downtown, they might be commuting from somewhere else. So here's what we have. As you look at these next 3 charts, dark blue is going to be signifying low income, green, middle income, and light blue, high income. So if you take a look in the center, you'll see a circle with a little diamond in the middle of it. That's kind of like Haynes Mall Forsyth Hospital. That's where that is. And so then what the database does, it says, okay, I'm going to count up all the workers who work in that circle, and I'm going to tell you where they live. And that's the blue dots and shading around. And so when we see a lot of intensity up around the green square to the top, that's near Chatillon and Polo. There's a good deal of workers from the mall up there. In the sort of gold square, northeast Winston-Salem, north of downtown, good bit of mall workers there. And then the red circle closest to the mall, just a little bit west, north of 421 there. So we see that, but let's take a look at middle income workers, which is similar but not too different. One thing you'll notice is that middle income workers are more spread out. They're more likely to own a car so they can live a little bit farther away. The biggest cluster here is still quite close to the mall. It's near Haynes Mall and Forsyth. So if we're thinking about how we connect people to the mall, and we've seen that there's a good cluster on the low income side there and the middle income side, we want to be paying attention to that connection. Here's another thing that I think will show up in some of the citywide maps in a few minutes. This is the high income map. And remember how I said those are skewed towards West Winston? This is middle income, high, middle, high. So you can see the significant shift of income level by employment as you move east to west in the city. So we know that when we are thinking about routes that we might want to make adjustments to or even change and repurpose, the west side of the city might be a place we look. So we've talked a little bit about travel markets. Let's put route performance and bus stop ridership together. What we've learned from some of the analysis of that data is, like I said, income and ridership are very highly correlated. Those high-performing routes I'm going to show you in the next few slides, they're going to highlight those 4 major employment centers we talked about. They're also going to be connecting to neighborhoods with greater numbers of lower-income residents. We talked about West Winston being less correlated with strong ridership. The last part here is kind of interesting. There are some low-performing routes in South Central and Southeastern Winston-Salem. And we didn't expect that because when you look at demographically out there, they look like a good match for transit service. But it's lower there. And I think out in that part of town, the routes are a lot more indirect for some reason. And I think if we can straighten them out, I think we can do better in that part of town. So now what I'm showing you is, remember those stops I talked about, the amenities, level 1, level 2, level 3? This is a map of all the level 2s, the level 1s, and the base level boardings. And this is also overlaid on a chart of income. So green, your darkest green is your highest income level, and your darkest brown is your lowest income level in this color gradient. And when you look at where all the dots of the stops that have a lot of the ridership showing up, they're coming up over on the middle to lower income side of the spectrum. So we do see that income is a strong predictor of where ridership interest is going to be with the public. So now let's go back and think about those service standards. If we're applying, you remember the red routes that were not performing so well and the green ones that were performing well, here's your system mapped by that productivity. So you can see in Northeast Winston, we have some more green up there for high-performing routes. If you look from downtown out towards the left bottom side of the drawing where the mall is, you see a lot of green there because of the employment. And then we see some orange and yellow and red on the west side of the city and the south side of the city. And I'm just going to show you the high performers for a moment. So if we toggle back and forth between everything and the high performers, it's the red and the orange ones that are sort of the ripest for reform, changes, improvements, adjustments that will hopefully do a better job of serving customers or serve markets we're not doing a good enough job of serving just yet. Bus operator surveys. Bus operators are the eyes and ears of the system. They know things that no consultant from out of town can tell you. So it's really important to hear what they say and see what they come up with. And we got, I think, Donna, was it 37 or 40 plus surveys from the operators? We got a lot of good free comments. This, that are good, but it's the notes we get. Run buses at least once every 30 minutes, not every 60 minutes. Probably the most common thing we heard from the operators. Operators are concerned about their passengers. After 7 p.m., you guys had to make some challenging cuts because of COVID and staffing, and you're not facing that alone. Every transit agency in the country is facing the same challenge. But they know people who are now paying for expensive cab rides after 7 p.m. It's hitting their families' budgets. They feel for their customers would love to be able to pick them up and carry them home in a way that's more affordable for them. Routes 83, 87, 96, and 103, the operator said again, we need more service. They're pretty busy. And then Route 100, the operators, they just told it plainly. Said one operator said, this route is not a good expenditure of taxpayer dollars. Please do something. Straight ahead. But 25% of the operators said the same thing. So we feel pretty good that Route 100 needs to be recycled into a better idea. So just putting it here, my blue arrow at the top, there's the arrow pointing to Route 100, what the operators want to see stop happening. And then down at the bottom, I put a green pair of stars near the 4 routes that the operators said were doing really well. This is kind of an exciting thing for an analyst because what it tells you is the data that's coming from your data gathering system and the stories your best experts are telling you match, which means we have a good confidence level about what's going on. So that kind of brings us to where we are. We have really finished the data gathering. We're starting to put together our first recommendations, which we'll be sharing with staff internally and WISTA staff, and probably some of the operators to get their feedback before we go out to the public. Last thing you want to do is suggest a turn that the operators go, Patrick, that's not going to happen. I can't make that left. So we want to check in with them, make sure it's going well. But really our goals here, we're going to do a full repurposing of Route 100 hours, trying to kick off that virtuous cycle of improvement. We're going to look at the other lower performers. There's probably 6 or 7 other routes where maybe there are some hours that can be reused in a different way. Also, we've had some discussions within the team about microtransit. Are there possibilities where something that's more on demand for certain times of the day? Maybe there's an industrial cluster that has a big shift change at 7 p.m. Maybe we do an on-demand thing that links to routes to connect those opportunities. These are all possible things we'll be looking into, but our implementation steps for these, we'll work with the staff to share when and how we're going to share those changes with the public. We'll have a public comment period, and hopefully we'll deploy quick win services first, and then we'll come back with, in the long term, the bigger proposal for the network. Here's, I think, the most important slide. If you forget everything else I say to you tonight, this is the slide I want you to remember. When I did service planning changes, the hearings were very challenging, and this dynamic that I'm about to explain is why. Every bus route that the city runs helps complete a trip that's important to somebody. In some cases, their job depends on it. But it's also possible and also true that a different routing could help even 10 more people get to work. And so what happens is our current riders, rightfully, will call and say, this is going to negatively impact my life if you do this. This is going to challenge my family financially. And they'll be speaking their truth. The challenge is that there may be a larger group of future riders who will benefit an order of magnitude greater, but we won't hear from them. And the part of the reason is, and this is vexing to every transit provider everywhere, is you can do as many public meetings as you can, but nothing is as good an advertiser for the bus as a new bus route running by your store 27 times a day. You're like, oh, there's a bus, I can take it now. And so what happens is you put the new service out, people figure it out 3 to 6 months from now, but they don't come to the public hearing. So there's a dynamic where those of you in leadership roles, it's a challenge. I just want you to be prepared to hear concerns, and you may or may not hear as much excitement. Those people are out there. We just might not see them for 3 to 6 months. So final quote here, it's impossible to improve service for many people without impacting some others. In my experience, the best decisions increase the number of people we serve with the same number of funds. We impact more people's lives. We give more people opportunity. So future steps. I talked a little bit about quick wins. Those will be coming in the shorter term, 3 months or so. But developing 2 different scenarios for a future Worcester route system, imagining a future that probably contains some elements of things that are there today, probably some things that aren't here today, some different types of bus routes that come more frequently in those places that the operators are seeing as high ridership places, ways to connect microtransit to some of the outlying places. There are some places that do microtransit where you go directly from where you pick them up and directly to where you take them off. Sometimes it's even more effective to pick 2 or 3 people up, take them to a hub, and then they take a bus that runs every 15 minutes somewhere. We'll explore both kinds of ideas. It might be that some work in some parts of the city, and others are going to match other parts of the city. And then we'll have a final we'll have public comment on those 2 scenarios, and after the 2 scenarios are shared, we'll work with Tanique, Donna, and the team to come up with a final master plan for Worcester's route system. So with that, that's my presentation. I'm very happy to take questions you have or hear some questions.
Thank you. Questions from committee members? Councilmember Scipio.
I always have questions about something.
It's better to get them than not.
With what you're doing, it's just reflecting the way the transit system is currently organized with that hub and spoke kind of system. Would you explore a system that could connect buses north, south, east, west, crossing in transit, not coming downtown, for more efficiencies for some routes? Is that something you might be exploring?
So the first answer is certainly. We will definitely be looking into that. One of the challenges is that right now you have a system that mostly runs hourly service. The services where you're talking about, not every trip has to go downtown, and maybe like someone who lives in East Winston and works up at Haynes Mill Road, they got to come all the way in here, and then they got to go all the way up there. And if they could go that way, it would be a little bit easier. And that's right. The challenge is that sometimes to do that service, there needs to be more resources. So the systems that have that system, your crosstowns are always going to be a little bit lower productivity than your places that go into your big urban cores. But we are definitely going to look at whether or not the hub and spoke makes sense anymore. I think when you get into the individual route levels, we will find that there are some parts of the hub and spoke that will continue to make sense, meeting at the Clark Transportation Center. And there are going to be some things that, maybe the meeting center isn't at Clark. Maybe it's somewhere else. Maybe the mall is becoming a bigger transit hub, or our hospitals. And I talked about the South Side and feeling like they have the demographics to have stronger ridership. Maybe they're like, if you're on the South Side and you work at Forsyth, that's a journey. You're going downtown and you're coming all the way back out. We've got to figure out are there multiple ways, like you're saying, that you don't have to go downtown? So if you live in a part of the city that's like, if you're at 5 o'clock and you're going to 9 o'clock, we're going to explore that, yeah. You're absolutely right, it's really important.
And would you also be exploring perhaps in focus groups or some kind of other method, how do we get routes out to the west side? Who would ride? Why would they come? What do we need to do to make that expansion of our system so you have more riders?
Yeah. So I think one of the places where we see in terms of getting out to the west side, why aren't folks in the west riding that much? I'd say the primary answer is that people own cars and they find that their cars work conveniently for them. I think the question is not necessarily about what are the routes that are out there, but what are the services that are out there. And there are parts of there's a lot of high-income residential on that side of the city. But there are also folks who are low-income who live in other parts of the city who work in jobs over there. And if you pull all the service out of that part of the city, you're hurting low-income residents who work there but don't live in the neighborhood, and you have to be mindful of that. So I think part of it is, and some of the other providers around the state are experimenting. I think there are 19 transit agencies in North Carolina right now that are experimenting with microtransit. You come to this part of the city, and then you can get like a 15-minute halo where you can get driven to somewhere else. East Durham right now, for example, a part of the city that has very high transit demand, but there's a lot of sort of old farm country roads and not a lot of easy blocks, not a lot of sidewalks. They've been doing an on-demand pilot where you ride Route 3A and 3B, which comes every 15 minutes, but then you can connect to Microtransit, which will take you up to a 15-minute ride away from the corridor. Those folks have a lot more access to jobs than they could walk to when they get off the bus. We need to think about what kind of places in the city that might make sense.
Thank you. Other questions? I've got a bunch.
Yeah, let's go.
Jeff, before you do yours, can I have one more
Yeah, sure,
question?
certainly.
I think that with the cost of gas going up, we have our public transportation system. We somehow need to get it in a position to have more riders, because I will ride the bus when the gas goes up to $6 a gallon. I know where my route is now and how long it takes me to come downtown. So, but I think there might be others that we need to be able to be creative about. How do we get people to where they need to go as the economy changes? Because I know that's going to be some suffering on people's parts.
Let me plant one seed of an idea for you guys to think about that we're going to be looking at. When you think about equity in fares, right? Somebody gets on the bus, they pay $1 fare, they ride to work. If they're riding home, they pay $1 fare. If they want to stop off and shop for groceries, because I just heard in the last meeting about how there aren't grocery stores in every part of the city,
Right.
then if they get off the bus, they have to pay another $1. So now they paid $3. What we've been using in some of the other transit agencies is a day pass, which is you pay $2 at the beginning of the day, and you get unlimited rides for one day. And part of the equity of the day pass compared to the monthly pass is a high-income rider might be able to lay out $60 a month at one time. But some working folks, that's just not really, they're trying to feed their family. But many of them can lay out 2 at a time. So what happens is with the day pass for $2 in your hand, that trip from the grocery store home, that's free. Yeah. If you got to pick up a kid at daycare every night, that's 5 free trips a week. But it also makes your bus service more productive because they're using the system with a day pass, and now you're getting 3 rides a day instead of 2 because it's more cost efficient for them. So I think a day pass is something we'll be talking about to get at some of the economic factors regardless of whether gas goes up.
Councilmember Larson.
Yeah, you sort of just began to answer a question that I had, and that is the administration of passes and getting on the bus, as it were, and paying for that ride and the logistics of all of that. I had a friend of mine or a colleague that approached about buying a day pass, and apparently it can only be bought with cash, not with credit cards. And it has to be done through a machine that receives the money, and you go to the ATM, it gives you $20 bills. If you're buying a 30-day pass, you get $10 worth of quarters and change. So there's something to be looked at as in our how user-friendly we are in how we administer. I love the concept. A day pass is an incredible bargain. For $1, basically, you can ride the bus all day.
And to your point, I think this is kind of, I feel like this is a challenging moment for transit because right now there's credit cards, there's Apple Pay, there's Google Pay, there's like Square that people are using at restaurants. So the number of payment technologies that have proliferated in just the last few years alone, makes the exact conundrum you're talking about challenging to sometimes figure out the path forward. I think the way to address that is to think about, in terms of when you're purchasing buses and fare boxes, to make strategic decisions about the types of fares you want to sell. And I haven't, Donna, we haven't talked about when your fare boxes are turned over to you. Do you know when they might be bought again?
I will, to your point, as far as the cash fare, we have already started to implement and have an agreement for credit card machines, ticket vending machines. So we have addressed that, and they will be installed in the near future.
Apparently, if you go into the center, the bus center, you're approached with a series of windows and glass, and the people standing behind the glass, but nothing that says welcome or information or tickets here or anything. And it's rather intimidating for somebody who doesn't know anything about getting on the bus the first time. It's the process of how they buy a ticket, or whether they can buy a day pass, or whether they can pay cash, or whether they have to pay credit cards. Or the information system doesn't seem to be as clean as maybe it could be, and it's something just maybe pay a little bit of attention to as a consumer. This comes from an experience of somebody who had never ridden the bus but was buying, in the process of trying to buy a 30-day pass, basically, and tried to do it with a credit card, and it wouldn't accept the credit card. And they had to go to an ATM machine, and the ATM machine in the bus station wasn't working. And they had to then go find an ATM machine, and they got $20 bills, and they were buying a 30-day pass for $30, and it got encumbered. And we can do better. We can do better than that, maybe.
Yes, sir. And I will definitely look into that. We have a machine for the ticket and the passes that's actually in the wall. As soon as you come in the transportation center, there's one there, and then you turn the corner, there's one. And then we also have one behind the counter. So in case there is an issue with one of the ones that's installed in the wall, that a passenger or consumer can actually get it from there. But you are correct in that it's cash only. So that's why we have been working out the logistics with the agreements and everything for the vending machine that would allow credit card purchase.
Be great. That would be great. Do you work behind the people behind the counter actually issue tickets, or is that all done separately?
It's all done separately. They can actually purchase them from the admin building or from the vending machines.
Then from the vending machine,
Yes.
so there's no personal contact with
No, sir.
anybody there. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. First, let me just say thank you. This is a much-needed dose of data. I mean, we've been talking about making our system more efficient for quite some time. We went through the first ever rerouting changes to our system a couple of years ago. Some things came out of that better, some things came out of it not so much. But this is a much-needed deep dive into how we empower people to move around the city and live where they want to live and work where they want to work. You've probably seen the bus stop jobs film done here locally, and it just really is eye-opening how much time people have to spend getting to where they work, which is just it impacts so many other aspects of their lives. So anything that we can do to improve efficiency, I want to highly recommend. Besides Ms. Woodson's excellent work, how do we manage to be the lowest cost provider per hour in the state?
I mean, that's a great question, and I'll go back to the graph. So I mean, when I look at it, so just full disclosure, I worked at Go Triangle for 16 years in the public sector. I'm a relatively new consultant, but Go Triangle here, I believe, is the brown line up at the top at about $160 an hour. Go Triangle is in the triangle where wages are higher. It's one of the few systems that is directly operated rather than through a contractor. You guys are here with a contractor for your arrangement. I think that helps. I think the other piece here that might be operating it, just to put it out there, is that the level of spending per resident in the city you guys have is a little bit lower here. So this is one of those things where it's tricky, right? Like if you went to all 15-minute service, you might see cost per hour go up because you have dispatchers on later into the evening or like past midnight or something. But you might be serving more people. So I would have to do more deep dives on all these other places to understand why Donna is so effective. But I can just tell you from working with her and how her team provides data back, I assume that she tracks the dollars the way she tracks the riders, and that's probably part of the magic.
Well, and part of my question there is that, I mean, from a cost structure, everybody deals with the same cost per bus, essentially, because that's mostly coming from federal dollars, right? I mean, the vehicles are paid for by and large by the feds. And everybody's fuel costs are going to be about the same. And labor costs are going to vary market to market, but we're probably in one of the lower cost labor markets of the ones that we tout here. So it'd just be interesting to see what our advantage is and try to.
So I mean, I think at the mathematical level, operations is about 70 to 80% labor at most of the places you go. So I think whatever is going on the labor side, I think is part of the equation. Wages are higher in Charlotte and the Triangle than here, not too much, but noticeably. So maybe that's part of it.
Something that has always struck me is that it seems like the size of the vehicle that we use to transport people often seems way out of balance with the number of people we're transporting. But again, I think some of that is driven by the dollars that come down from the feds. I mean, they don't want to buy us 15-passenger buses. My assumption is.
Well, I mean, I think part of the thing about having a fleet with the larger buses is the buses move around. They're not always on the same routes every day. So you might have a 40-foot bus on Route 100, which carries 14 people a day, and the next day it's on 83 carrying 370 people over 12 hours. And boy, are you glad you have the big bus on 83 the next day. So part of it, I think, having that is through the system. I think the other thing is that with the smaller vehicles, going back to the part about labor being about 70 to 80% of the cost, you can buy smaller vehicles. But if you're successful, you then have a problem, and you probably haven't saved that much money because the labor is still the largest part of your cost structure. So I think my thought here is that we need to do more of the study. But I think you're right now you've got a good standard vehicle size for a place where you're about to do some service planning that might increase your ridership. And if you move to sort of some microtransit options, that's where the smaller vehicle question might be more cost effective. But we'll be exploring that over the future months. I'll have a better answer for that for you in like 6 months.
Yeah, and I was interested in your conversation about sort of the cost to the riders whose routes are going to go away.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt that people's lives are affected by that. Where they live, where they work, all falls under. If you can't afford to own a car, you base where you're going to live, sometimes where you're going to work, on where the bus runs. I mean, when we take that away from people, we need to be extremely careful about that and be as inventive as possible about how we ameliorate those costs. And that's an area that I think I'd like to see us explore with VIA or some some other microtransit things to just minimize, because over time people do adapt to that. But it's that midterm, that short term, I think is very, very painful for people. And I think anything we can do to minimize that is something we should do. I want John's point about the friction involved in paying. I think is fairly significant in people's unwillingness to ride. How do I get on a bus once I get to a bus stop or to the central station? People don't want to deal with a system that they don't know how to operate. It's the same thing with parking meters. Our kiosk meters are far less expensive for us to operate, but people hate them. So reducing the friction to getting a ticket, to me, will be an important thing to look at in this. What else do I have? Oh, and I guess I was kind of surprised, and maybe this will evolve over time, but the Southeast not being a big point of travel kind of surprised me, because that seems to be where our industrial development is occurring. But maybe that's just new enough, and maybe the jobs pay enough that we're not seeing the number of people employed there yet for that to be impactful.
So it struck us, when we looked at the demographics of this part of the city, and you look at some of the other places that have high ridership, demographically, I would expect to see more green, or more at least yellow down here than as the orange and some of the red we do. Though when I look at this, like if I'm on this bus here, and I'm trying to get to somewhere that isn't right here, I'm coming all the way out here before I start to come back into the rest of the city for jobs anywhere else. So it might be that we have sort of a directness challenge here where this route might have been set up to serve like a new industrial hub, a new employer, and that was a well-intentioned idea to be tried out. But over time, it's proven not to be the match we hoped, and it just hasn't been tinkered with appropriately yet. And so to me, I think the way we would approach out here is looking at, like our team will look through the schedules, we'll look at the travel time of somebody who might live here and where they might be going and try to say, okay, could we serve a lot of these same people, but cut the ride by 10 minutes? What would that look like? And then we start drawing on the routes until we feel like if we've saved 10 minutes or not. And those might be some of the concepts we might bring to Tanique and Donna's team to have them say, does this look like it might resonate? And then if we think so, maybe we take it out to the community for some comment. But yeah, I think over there, route planning and streamlining and thinking about that customer experience you're talking about in travel time, we might be able to increase ridership out there. I'm hopeful.
In your data gathering and in your deep dives, are you engaged with Greater Winston-Salem to talk about what they see coming down the pipeline for employment shifts and or directly with large employers like the hospitals?
In some of our other work, we've talked a little bit with some of those folks in terms of like things that may be coming here. I would say that in terms of the size of the system we have here, I don't know how much capacity we have to respond to, like, let's say Amazon opened a new distribution warehouse with 600 jobs out on the edge of the city somewhere. That would be something if we knew it was coming, we'd definitely take a look at it. At the same time, I don't know how much hours if we go through a recycling process, if that would be the best bang for we'd have to do a bang for a buck analysis, but it would be good to be aware of those, and we can certainly check in with, some of those folks you mentioned to make sure we're not missing anything.
Well, and then trying to forecast a ripple effect from all the development happening in the core, the airline core, because there's thousands and thousands of jobs there now, whether that impacts us directly or indirectly, it's a tsunami coming to the area. So
Sure, yeah.
Folding that into the conversation, I think, is important. All right, anything else from, yes, Councilmember Scipio, Councilmember Burke?
I just wanted to say one thing. Ms. Woodson, we appreciate your efficiency. Thank you.
Councilmember Scipio.
One more concern. I know that I was looking at data on the qualified census tracts where a lot of our bus ridership exists. And one of the things that was interesting to me was that the data that I looked at was the number of vehicles in various households. And I was a bit shocked that many households had a vehicle. And so I wondered, in your data collection here where you show where the jobs, where people are moving to work, can you also look at households that have cars and vehicles? Because our assumption oftentimes is that people living in poverty don't have cars.
It's more complicated than that.
And it may not be totally true that we have to provide their service. It's sort of good to see who's riding the bus and why. But if you're going to expand the service, I think we might look at that dynamic too about car ownership.
So we have looked at zero-car household data, and if it's something you guys would like, we could get a map to Tanique and Matt, and they could share it back to you guys. But one of the things that was interesting, so when I lived here in 2001, I was out at 4835 Chatelaine Drive, which is kind of up here near Old Town. There was a reasonable cluster of zero-car households like out here somewhere, which I did not expect. Okay. So even throughout the city, while there are households in neighborhoods that have higher levels of poverty, that there are 2 workers and 2 cars, there are also parts of the city where that's a really far away place from a lot of jobs to be living not on a car. People are still doing it. So people are incredibly inventive. Like they might be carpooling with neighbors. There might be like a church van that is helping get 4 people to work. So, you know, what you're talking about in the data, though, we've tried to pay attention to that to understand what the dynamic is. I really think the household that people think about the least is the 2-worker, 1-car household. It's the family that's maybe they were living in poverty a few years ago. They're kind of on their way up economically. One of them has a job, but they're like trading off who has the car on which day to hold it all together. But a lot of those folks are on the bus too. It's not simply people who don't have cars or people who have 2, 3, or 4 cars in the garage. That 1-car family is a lot of who we're serving.
Well, and to kind of wrap this up, you know, getting it right is really important because I think the more routes change, the less faith people have in where can I live, where can I work, because again, the friction of changing that is so high. Gas prices going up, most people view that, I think, as a temporary thing. So a spike in gas prices has got to stay high for some period of time before people say that's the new normal. And I really do have to change. When we shut down Business 40, the expectation was that we would get a lot more ridership from people who, you know, didn't want to deal with all that noise, and it didn't happen. Yeah. So, I mean, some of our expectations about what's going to happen are, you know, our crystal ball is not always super clear.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That was incredibly informative. Keep the data coming.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
All right. That was a deep dive, but I think it was important, as is the next item.
Item G2, information relating to extension of the franchise granted to Winston-Salem Forsyth County Utilities to operate Haynes Mill Road landfill.
Good evening, Ms. Driver.
Hey, good evening, Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for giving me the opportunity tonight to come speak to you regarding 2 utility items. The first one is a franchise agreement extension with Winston-Salem Forsyth County Utilities to operate Haynes Mill Road landfill, and there was an information item, and I'll try to summarize the key points of that. So North Carolina general statutes requires an applicant for a municipal solid waste landfill obtain a franchise for the operation of the landfill from each local government having jurisdiction over any part of the land where the landfill is located. So a franchise agreement was adopted by the City Council and then approved by the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Utility Commission in 2000. That was for a term of 30 years to operate and maintain Haynes Mill Road landfill. In 2019, an application to amend the landfill's permit was submitted to the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. This amendment would increase capacity available for the waste by approving construction of an earthen berm around the perimeter of the landfill, of the disposal area. The berm would serve as a wall to where we could dispose of more waste between the existing landfill site and the berm. The elevation of the landfill will not change, but the life of the landfill would be lengthened. DEQ has requested that the current franchise, which is set to expire in March of 2030, be extended, and that it coincide with the permit application through April the 9th, 2057. Therefore, there is going to be an item on the council's agenda, the November 1st agenda, approving this franchise agreement. And then a second reading of the franchise is planned to be on the agenda, the council's agenda for October 14th. So if you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer.
Questions, comments? Councilmember Larson?
We just approved recently a wall to be built around part of the landfill. Is that part of the berm arrangement? Or?
That is all part of this process. So the rezoning was for the berm to be built, right. And then part of the permit, obtaining the new permit from the state requires us to extend that franchise agreement.
Right, okay.
Did you want to?
Mr. King?
I just want to clean up one thing. I think what Courtney was saying is the first reading is November the 1st, second reading is the second meeting in November.
Yeah.
I think you had them backwards.
I did have it backwards. I'm sorry. Thank you.
That would be an interesting trick.
Yeah.
I think I said November 1st and then October 14th, right? Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's actually November 14th, right?
Got it.
Yes, yes.
Okay, I mean, it seems pretty cut and dried, pretty straightforward.
It's just an administrative thing that we need to do as part of the process.
Certainly. Okay. Any other questions?
I do. Sometimes terms can be confusing. Extension of the franchise granted. The franchise was granted to Winston-Salem?
To
By?
the Utility Commission by the City Council.
To do this in accordance with the state statute, right?
Correct. That is
Okay.
correct.
Very good. This is an information item.
Correct.
Thank you for the info.
Yes. Okay.
All right. You might want to stay put because I think we
Yep.
got something else coming your way now.
Item G3,
G3.
information on Winston-Salem Forsyth County Utilities Lead Compliance Program.
Lead.
Is this Courtney or is this Aaron?
This is me.
Okay, great.
Do I have this right? It seems like it's not. Do I need to? Oh, this one? Okay, there we go. Okay, yes. So the next item is just to discuss with you the lead compliance program for our department. And I just want to start off by giving you a little bit of history on our lead and copper rule. So originally, the lead and copper rule was promulgated by the Environmental Protection Agency in January of 1991. The lead and copper rule is the only rule that requires sampling from inside the customer home. So all the other samples are taken from our water distribution system or at the water treatment facilities. Our utility began a corrosion control program in March of 1992 in response to the lead and copper rule. Since the original rule was published, there have been several minor revisions, and our utility has maintained excellent compliance history with the original rule, as well as all the revisions since it was enacted in 1991. And actually, our utility has, for more than 20 years, met or surpassed all of our water quality standards. So with the lead compliance rule as well as others. So we're in the process of developing our lead and compliance program to ensure continued compliance with requirements of the revisions of 2021, which I'll get into now. So the EPA lead and copper rule revisions were revised in 2021. You can see that it's promulgated in January of 2001 and then became effective in December of 2021. And then all utilities have to be in compliance by October of 2024. This is the most significant revision to the rule since it was enacted in the beginning in 1991. Obviously, in response to issues that have happened in other parts of the country. So an overview of the revisions, we have to do a service line inventory. We have to figure out the materials on the public and private side of the service line. We have to update our compliance monitoring plan. We have to put together a service line replacement plan. We have to put together a list of school and child care facilities and a sampling plan for those facilities. We have to prepare public education and outreach materials, and then we submit all these pieces to the primacy agency for approval, and our primacy agency is the state of North Carolina. Again, the compliance deadline for all this is October of 2024, and it is required for every utility in the United States. This is one of the main reasons I wanted to present to you tonight is to let you know that letters will be mailed out soon to approximately 300 of our customers to perform vacuum excavation to determine the service line material. So we'll be doing vacuum excavation on the private and public side. So in your terms, is before and after the meter. So we need permission to get on their property. And we wanted you to be aware in case someone asks you about, what's going on, and or maybe one of you might actually get a letter as well. We hope to get 150 respondents. The results from what we find will be used in a predictive modeling to help us determine what material types we have on our service lines in our community. And then I also just wanted to note that we did receive a $400,000 grant for development of this program with ARPA funds. Letters will eventually be sent to all customers. Customers will have the opportunity to report their own service line material if they know what it is. It'll be through an online dashboard that we are currently putting together now. This will help us to gather additional information about material types in homes and businesses. Next, we'll talk about the compliance monitoring plan. This is going to be based on the completed service line inventory and predictive modeling results that we receive. We're going to identify a list of sampling sites based on the updated tier structure of the revisions to the rule. We'll develop a plan for communication materials and new sampling protocols if lead service lines are found. Another requirement of the rule is that if a customer has a lead service line and they choose not to replace it, the utility has to notify them annually that exists. The service line replacement plan is required for all utilities with lead service lines found, galvanized lines requiring replacement, and any unknown material lines. So we have to have this plan. We have to prioritize replacement. We have a plan that would be in place, but it would only be implemented if we exceed the trigger levels for the lead action levels are exceeded. So that's only implemented if that happens. School and child care sampling plans. So we all know that young children and infants are particularly vulnerable to lead exposure. Part of the revisions to the rule, one of the goals is to increase knowledge of potential lead exposure. There's increased testing at school and child care facilities. The revisions also have language to prioritize social environmental equity. It would be under a 5-year testing cycle. And the rule calls for testing at only elementary schools and middle schools. However, our utility has decided that we will be testing at all schools. And then the last is just a public education piece that we're responsible for. Obviously, we want to have customer and stakeholder awareness and engagement. We want to be transparent and proactive and just inform and educate our customers of lead exposure in the program. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Courtney. That was very thorough. Questions for Ms. Driver? Councilmember Larson.
Apparently, under the 1991 ordinance or law, that individual homeowners were supposed to be tested. Is that, understand that correct?
So we do our testing. I think this might be what you're asking. So our testing is done in the customer's home. So that's where we're sampling currently under this lead and copper rule, and we'll continue to do that under the new
Continuing to
revisions.
do that. How many units are you able to do in a year?
I've got Bill Brewer is our deputy utilities director, and he's the expert on the testing. So I'm going to let him come up and answer that question.
The question is, we got a lot of homes and there's a lot of testing to be done. I'm just wondering how frequently you can get to houses.
Well, under the current rule, we're under what's considered to be reduced monitoring. So we sample 50 homes every 3 years. When the original rule was implemented in the 1992 cycle, we sampled 100 homes in the first 6 months of the year and then 100 homes in the second 6 months. And then based on the results of those sampling, dictated what sampling we had to continue to do in the future. So right now, our overall sample pool has over 350 homes. DEQ likes for us to sample from the same homes each sampling cycle. And as I mentioned, we're under the reduced sampling cycle, so we do 50 homes every 3 years.
Your repeat sampling, is that what I understand?
Yes, sir.
Your repeat sampling. So if someone is concerned about lead in their house, lead pipes in their house, can you provide a service to inspect that?
Yeah, so even if someone is not part of our sampling program or on that list, if they had concerns and wanted us to take a sample from their house, we would do that. They would just need to contact us, and we definitely could do
They would need
that.
to contact you, and you would send
Yes,
out
they could call CityLink and request that.
a sampling.
We typically do about 5 of those a month, on average.
Councilmember Scipio.
This is very interesting, and it's really complicated, seemingly. Since you're saying you've already sampled homes, are they across the city so that you get a representation of different neighborhoods? And do you also test by age of home because the construction may have been different across decades?
I'll let you handle that one.
Yes, ma'am. We do make a very concerted effort to make sure the distribution of samples is equally representative of the entire city. And we do target homes. The current sampling tier structure requires us to target homes that were built at a specific time. It was 1984 to 1986 when lead solder was banned. So those are the homes that we're currently targeting.
So homes built between 1984 and 1986 are the ones that are in your 300 sample, and that you're going to be continuing?
Yes, ma'am.
Other questions?
I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
I don't quite understand that. We have whole neighborhoods like Ardmore, the 1930s, and what is it, probably early neighborhoods, some of our earliest neighborhoods in Winston-Salem date back to the 1920s and 30s, and are very susceptible, I think, to lead piping and lead paint and what have you. Are we not targeting those houses and neighborhoods?
Do you want to get that one again? He's talking about older than.
Yeah, are you asking specifically about lead service lines? Is that?
Were lead service lines used as a common construction technique or material?
Not that we're aware of, excuse me, not that we're aware of. We typically, we have not found lead service lines, but we have found what are called pigtails or goosenecks, which is about a 2 to 3 foot section that actually connects the service line to the main. And Ms. Driver has a picture of one there. We have found those, and our policy has been to remove them when we do find them. But as far as
Speak into the mic a little bit.
oh, I'm sorry. As far as we're aware, we're not aware of actual lead service lines. But the results of this potholing vacuum excavation will hopefully let us know if we do have them. That's what we're searching for.
I was going to ask the same question, based on, if you want to find raw mix, electrical wiring in houses, you go to a certain age house. Mm-hmm. So we're aware of that, and we're targeting those areas that were most likely to find this as a problem. Yes, and from this presentation, I get that we've been checking our system, the public side of it, and we show up with good results. Now we're just pushing that off to test the private side of it. Would I be correct on that?
Yeah, so yes, we, as I mentioned earlier, we do the testing inside of customers' homes. So that's technically the private side. And as Bill mentioned earlier, we have had such an excellent compliance record that's why we don't have to test as often. We're doing it every 3 years and actually doing 50 versus the 200 that we were originally. But there's more requirements under the new revisions. So we have to have an inventory of every single service line that we have in our system. We have 130,000 connections. So it's a huge task to try to inventory all that. And we just haven't done. There hasn't been a need to inventory private service lines. We have what our materials are in our system. So it's going through the steps that are part of the revisions.
Got it. I've got a question about notification. Who will be notified? The occupant, the owner? With rental properties, I could see where that could be a bit of an issue.
Yeah, that will be tricky. We will send it to the owner of the dwelling. But if we have letters that come back, or if we need to do further investigation, it may be that we need to go to the water count. So whoever has the authority to allow us on that property is who we would go to get permission.
Like there's some reason to let people know who are actually living there, but may not own the property and may not get notification from an owner who gets that letter saying you've got a problem.
Right. Well, and we're sending out 300 with the hope to get back 150. So we know that there'll be some issues like that. And then if we don't get back 150, then we'll probably have to, do a little bit more, have a little bit more effort to try to get that to the number that we need.
Any other questions? Okay, Councilmember Larson.
Could you clarify, this is lead and copper. Could you define a little bit why copper is being listed with lead?
So I'll let Bill add in, but so the original rule is the lead and copper rule, but the revisions are more specific to lead
I would
compliance.
think so. I think
you wanna add
there's
anything
a
to
lot more copper than there is lead, obviously.
Yeah, that's essentially it. I mean, this rule is simply focused on lead. Copper, I just don't think that they found, that the health impacts were as negative as lead. So this rule really focuses on lead.
Other than lead copper, the solder joints in copper usually have lead in them, but other than that, I wasn't sure that.
Yes, sir.
Why copper was such a concern.
Yeah, so those materials are still of concern. However, the focus of this revision is essentially to try and eliminate as much lead as
lead.
possible.
Focus
And
on
it's
the lead.
focused on the surface
Right,
lines.
thank you.
Councilmember Scipio.
This is such a massive undertaking for what you have to document. And I know you're just doing a sample of 300. But I live in a house that was built between 1984 and 1986. I may not get a letter from you. Can we do a video or something that we could post on our website so that people can just self-inspect whatever needs to get done, so that I would hate for something to turn up in someone's home, but they weren't in your sample?
Yes, absolutely. And that is a big component of this, is that public education and awareness. And we're working on a website, we're working on FAQs, we're working on videos, we're working on tutorials to try to help point our customers and our citizens to a place where they can be informed and understand what's going on. And of course, if they have any questions, this is before even these revisions, they can always call our utility and request that we do sampling at their specific house. So that's always been an option.
And all that's free, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Well, it gets paid for somehow, but
As the services that you receive with your water.
great. All right. If there's nothing else, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
And if there's not, City Attorney?
Chairman McIntosh, if I may, can we go back to item G2?
Certainly.
This item is listed as information, but it will not come back to the committee
Okay.
because it's going to the city council meeting on November 1st and then on November 14th. So if you all want to go ahead and approve it and move it forward,
Great.
that would be fine.
Could I get a motion to approve this item?
So moved to approve G2.
Second.
There you go. Everybody's trigger finger is poised.
Sorry, I should have sent the.
Thank you for keeping us in line
Thank
once again.
Good catch.
Did it pop up?
It popped up
Okay.
and you wouldn't
Oh,
look.
did it? Okay, great. I missed it.
Sorry.
Very good. That's all
It
right.
was approved unanimously.
All right, thank you. Anything else for the good of the order? If not, thank you very much, everybody. We appreciate all the information brought to us tonight. Take care.